The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, approached Jesus. "Master," they said to him, "we want you to do us a favor." He said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Allow us to sit, one at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory." "You do not know what you are asking," Jesus said to them. "Can you drink the cup that I must drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I must be baptized?" They replied, "We can." Jesus said to them, "The cup that I must drink, you shall drink. And with the baptism with which I must be baptized, you shall be baptized. But as for seats at my right hand or my left, these are not mine to grant. They belong to those to whom they have been allotted." When the other 10 heard this, they began to feel indignant with James and John. So Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that among the pagans their so-called rulers lord it over them, and their great men make their authority felt. This is not to happen among you. No. Anyone who wants to become great among you must be your servant, and anyone who wants to be first among you must be slave to all. For the Son of Man himself did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord. I failed my first driving test, but it is a fact beyond any doubt or contradiction that those who pass their driving test second time are better drivers. I wondered whether I should say second or more times, but I'm going to go second. On my second driving test, the emergency stop was quite near the beginning of the test, and I confidently hit right between the pedals and missed the brake. And I thought, what a disaster. And then you know what happens, those of you who've done a driving test, you have to keep going. You have to drive and drive and drive, knowing that you failed and waiting for your fate to be delivered. And I got to the end, and he said, "You've passed." And he must have seen the shock on my face. He said, "You've passed because, yeah, you messed up the emergency stop, but then you brought it under control. And that was more important than getting it wrong in the first place." I want to ask you this question. Have you ever failed at anything? And is it better to have failed and to learn from that experience, or to hope that you will go through life never failing anything? If, for example, you never failed an exam at school, and you've gone through a certain amount of life, and then you fail something, it can have a greater impact on you than if you got something wrong pretty early on and got used to the fact that you're fallible. If somebody asked you whether you would like to suffer or not, the answer would probably be no, thank you. Today's readings are about suffering and weakness. If somebody said to you, okay, so you don't want to suffer, but in order to be closer to Christ, suffering is part of that, then the do I want to, do I not is not quite so obvious anymore. Those who suffer are closer to Christ. The readings of today's Mass are challenging for us. That first reading, if it seems familiar in any way, the Lord has been pleased to crush his servant with suffering, is a reading that we hear as the first reading, the prophet Isaiah, on Good Friday. You know, that day where we're in gloom and there's no redeeming features. The Lord has been pleased to crush him with suffering. But if he gives his life, then he will have long life and heirs to follow. In the gospel reading, the two apostles say, "Let us be with you in glory." And Jesus says, "Can you suffer?" And they say, "Yes." And he said, "Good, because I can guarantee you suffering, but I can't guarantee you the glory that follows it." But where does this leave us? Where do we understand suffering? The understanding of the Christian life is that being a person of faith doesn't give you all the answers, doesn't allow you to escape suffering, doesn't make you better than other people. So why do we bother? Well, Jesus says to his disciples, "You must share in my life." Have you ever witnessed somebody who is ill and who appears to have more strength than the people around them who are struggling more with it? Now, that doesn't mean that they suddenly have all the answers or that life is fine, but maybe something of that sharing in the sufferings of Christ brings them some level of peace with living with it. Think about the language we use about illness, fighting a battle, losing a battle. We don't want to fight or lose or anything like that. We live. And a bit like failure or success. Failure might not be that we never get anything wrong. Success might be that we got something wrong and learned from it. I believe being a Christian and being a Catholic is not having all the answers, but having somewhere to ask the questions. You may well have had this experience as a mass goer, as somebody who might be known among their family and friends and work colleagues, if you've been brave enough to tell your work colleagues. And they will come up to you and say, "You go to church. Will you say a prayer for my nan? You're a person who believes. Will you pray for me?" And all you need to do is say, "Yes, I will pray for you," and do it. And without doing too much, you have brought somebody hope and you've brought them solace. So today, let's not think of suffering as something to be avoided. When you see somebody who's ill or it's affecting their family and you hear people say, "I couldn't do it." Well, frankly, you have no choice if it comes your way. But the way in which we live with illness, the way we live with failure in our lives, is a means to grace. That second reading from the letter to the Hebrews is beautiful. Let us be confident then in approaching the throne of grace so that we may have grace from God to help us when we need it most.